Good evening and hello, everybody. And I'm John O'Loughlin, and you are watching me on one of two channels, either McDuff Lives or McDuff Lives 2, because yay, my second strike has finally expired and I'm down to only one. So I can swing away for another few innings in this great ball game of YouTube versus the truth. I'm going to stand up for the truth and keep swinging. How about you, Professor?
I'm going to keep swinging, but I'm going to keep it clean to keep you out of trouble.
That's what they all say.
All right. Well, we'll speak in code, sort of high context language to trick the algorithms.
All right. Well, that sounds good. I'm looking forward to tonight very much because I saw yesterday maybe 20 minutes of your show in which you did a deep dive based on a book by Robert Maxwell's wife, and going into that family. Betty Maxwell. There you go. But I'm thinking I was ruminating on how many times it's been in the shows that you and I and George have done, in which you have pointed to the importance of the female and how important was the role of the First Lady and Donald Trump, and the cultural icon that is presented by a First Lady is a powerful political force that I hadn't really thought about until you had given us, your opinion on it. Other examples, well, for instance, Native American matrilineal societies, which was what the society here in the Southern Maryland, the Piscataway Indian, were matrilineal. And that's a kind of an interesting thing because if you don't mind, and I warned you before the show, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into this just for the fun of it. I've mentioned this channel called Useful Charts before, and this guy does a great job of putting together the dynasties, or all kinds of interesting things. And not only that, he does a very good job of presentation. Well, following a couple of years of doing the dynasties in Europe, he found something out that I think is fascinating, and that is that there exists there it is. Oh, okay, Andy's got it up there. So hold on, Andy. Stop. Stop. Yeah, I was going to play it, but okay. All right. Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen because that makes it easier for me to keep it. All right, here we go. All right, so this is Europe's hidden matrilineal dynasty. And what it is he's gone through all the dynasties of Europe to the females and traced them back. And he's gone all the way back to about 1200 or so.
Hidden dynasty that has been sitting on the thrones of Europe for the last 600 years. This dynasty has been hiding in plain sight, an open secret, so to speak. But strangely, no one has really noticed. What I'm talking about is not some sort of crazy conspiracy theory, but a simple fact of genealogy that can be easily verified by anyone with access to basic sources such as Wikipedia. So why has this highly influential dynasty gone unnoticed? Well, it has gone unnoticed and, until now, unnamed because it's a matrilineal dynasty. Today, I'm going to introduce you to the greatest European royal house of all time, the House of Garcenda.
All right.
Wow.
I'm going to leave it there. But you should watch the whole show. It's only another 15 minutes. And he goes through and shows you, from Garcenda down to Queen Victoria, down to, who's the one we got now, Queen Elizabeth. The whole thing, it works, and it reminded me of Native American tribes that I've read about around here, and trying to sort out how does matrilineal succession work in the first place. It's kind of complicated, but setting aside the technical ideas, it seems to me that it's not an unreasonable theory to say, wow, maybe all these European kingdoms and dynasties have been kind of maneuvered from behind by a female hand. So
Ooh,
I'll open that. I'll leave it up to you to take that wherever you want. Thank you for being
wow.
here. I'm so glad you're here with us, Professor, and look forward to your thoughts.
John, I'm so glad to be invited back. I've been looking forward to this. It's been too long. And I watched your show earlier about your own studies, your own research about the Native American tribes in the Maryland area, matrilineally organized, as you structured, as you mentioned. And earlier today, I had a guest, Jamie Lee, who was doing the Hidden California history. And one of the early queens of what he calls the brown people, we know them as Native Americans, but he calls them brown people, was his Queen Khalifa. That's where California comes from. She was a dark-skinned female deity slash ruler. So I have long said that history is run on two rails. That's buggery and bastardy. And the third rail, the power rail, is incest. But it always sorts out through the matrilineal line. And we're seeing that played out today in the courts in the case of Ghislaine Maxwell. And my worst fears are being realized based on the comments I got on a talk I gave just Tuesday. I think I almost got something like 2,000 views in a very short time.
Oh,
I haven't checked lately, but there was a great interest in it. And again, as I anticipated, they were looking strictly at the sensationalistic, obvious mainstream and indie media account of Ghislaine Maxwell. And none of it's untrue, but it's just a partial glimpse of this, as you allude to, this matrilineal line. And get this, John, this is an author that we both value and appreciate. This particular matrilineal line is French Huguenot.
hmm
And who's Tupper Saucy's people?
absolutely.
Same, it's the same. And they have a huge impact on what later became the United States of America, the New World, North America. And it's not fully been explored, maybe purposely, because we in the independent research community have been diverted by in talking about just certain families over and over again until it's become a giant irritating echo chamber. That's the Rockefellers, it's the Rothschilds, blah, blah, blah. I've been hearing that for 30, 40, 50 years. It's time we expanded the field of exploration and include these, especially in the Protestant Huguenot bloodline, which is where she comes from. I thought she was native to the British Isles, if there are such a thing, but her first language was French. And it's interesting that her mother and father, they were products of a quote unquote mixed marriage. Her father was French Huguenot and her mother was Roman Catholic, and her mother converted to Protestantism. And for her efforts, she was excommunicated from the Church of Rome. And as you know, French history since the time of the Revolution, the French Revolution, has pretended or claimed itself to be a secular society. The Roman Catholic Church was disestablished. And for example, the Cathedral of Notre Dame, there cannot be any government or state money for its rebuilding or its rehabilitation, its restoration, its upkeep, because of that separation between church and state. Nonetheless, these bloodlines, which are sorted along these religious traditions of long standing, have not gone away, and they're still very much part of that circuit. So I'm interested in watching the rest of that video that you shared with me today and others who are watching this live chat to see whether he can make that connection with the power system, the larger religio-political power block that's running the world, really, even in the current days of the early decades of the 21st century. So this is it. Now, if I can just continue, and I'd like your insight on this, John. The real, and again, yeah, I agree. You've heard the phrase, the the hand that rocks the cradle.
hmm
And in her case, she rocked it 9 times in 9 years. She had 9 children in rapid succession. That's not so unusual, except for the fact the last one was Ghislaine Maxwell. And in reading this and you have to read against the grain, you have to bring your knowledge of previous research and whatnot, usually of the unorthodox side, the unorthodox bent, in order to really flesh out what she's laying out here, reading between the lines, so to speak. And in doing so, I suspect, and this has to be confirmed, and it's the responsibility of other researchers, and I'll be checking this out myself. My suspicion is that these were not necessarily her own biological children, nor were they necessarily the biological children of Robert Maxwell, Sir Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell. My suspicion, and this is in keeping with my research about buggery, bastardy, and incest, is that those children represent a cohort, a brood of mind-controlled sex-kidden courier types and administrators that were put in place there by these hereditary bloodlines. And that this is really the cause of many of the pre-modern wars, the wars between bastards. After all, William the Conqueror, as he is known by his supporters, is also known as William the Bastard. Right? So this is a history-making, epoch-making type intelligence. We're down here by just respecting what, ironically, the academic feminists has been telling us from the beginning, except that movement itself was taken over, perverted, and ironically pushed women off the historical stage by pushing an agenda of genocide, of abortion, infanticide. And again, I think that particular program is the brainchild of some of these hereditary bloodlines. There's too much competition coming from the middle class, the rising, ascendant, educated professional class, and they need to reduce any sort of, just as in some tribal societies, they would get rid of the male children, or warring tribes, they would decimate the men, right, and leave the children and women to go. So we're going through a similar bio culling process through a highly rationalized system that seems so naturalized to us because of all the science propaganda training that we got since the 1950s to present, where anybody who wears a white coat cannot be disputed, right? As Dr. Anthony Fausto says, I am science. And we have these pop figures, what is it, Neil deGrasse and Mr. Science, Bill Nye with a little bow tie, and you know, we grew up with the worship of technology. And I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying that when you occlude or occult the true knowledge of society, then you wind up with what we're faced today in 2021. And before I ask your take on this, John, I just wanted to add another name to the roster of women such as Ghislaine Maxwell, who have been programmed through trauma-based mind control, sex control, right? And there's lots of literature about it, a lot of academic literature on this. I don't have time to cite it. But another name, and this is something that we grew up as generational cohorts, John, we grew up with the Miss America pageant every year. It was like Americana, Burt Parks, here she comes, Miss America. It was an institution. But now, thanks to autobiography, thanks to a recognition of the women's voice and the power, the generative power in all societies universally, which is under attack right at this moment. But this woman named Marilyn Van der Burg, right, of the Dutch diaspora, I assume. She was Miss America in 1957, and the title is Miss America by Day, and the subtitle is Lessons Learned from Ultimate Betrayals and Unconditional Love. Unconditional love is the story ends well. She did find love. She did find, she recovered herself, just as Kathy O'Brien did with Mark Phillips. It doesn't always have to end in tragedy, but first of all, you have to face the truth of your own existence, even if it relates to long-term, since the age of 5, incestuous abuse by her own father. And this also included her siblings of 3 sisters. So there's a total of 4 girls there. And it seems to have been, and she doesn't go into this, but I'm inferring here that it seems to be multi-generational. So through books like this and through autobiographical accounts like this and through sensationalistic criminal trials like the current one on Ghislaine Maxwell, we begin to form, through our own inferences and our own independent study, we begin to form a deeper understanding of the core evil and sickness of these ruling regimes built upon bastardy. There's nothing wrong with being an illegitimate child, but when you glorify it and create world wars on the basis of legitimacy versus illegitimacy, that becomes a problem. Bastardy, buggery, and multi-generational incest. Yeah, thank you very much, Andy Dybala, the fastest producer in the West or the Midwest.
That's right. Or the East Coast for if I have a vote.
Yes, globally. Thank you, Andy. That's when she won the crown. I think what, 1957.
So
that's her father. I think that's her own father, I believe. And this book here is lavishly illustrated. I think that's one of the photos from the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so, John, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up in that time period as a kid, 1960s and 70s, and even through college, I was blissfully unaware of this core evil that now they've revealed themselves. They have been forced out into the open, even into a trial situation. But we have to be vigilant that the way it's reported, right? The spin doctors, the way it's reported does not simply put a little neat bow on it and say, okay, we've achieved justice with Ghislaine Maxwell, end of story. No, that's the beginning of the story. And you alluded to it not alluded to it, you cited it at the top of the show with that video. That's really at the core of what we're dealing with, a systemic problem.
Well, it's a systemic problem that's not, it didn't just happen though. This is the evil. Evil requires somebody to make it happen. That's one of the things. And so when we consider these, they're really mind control programs. The mind control programs, even though it's what most of us would think of as horrific abuse, that abuse doesn't necessarily come from the fact that the abuser has some kind of a sick mind or a psychological addiction or impediment. It may be doing, they may be doing it, and I suspect that they're basically doing it intentionally as part of a something that they've fallen into. Maybe you're a great scientist and you end up at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and you meet somebody that takes you into a back room, and the next thing you know, you're part of something that you really didn't know you were going to get into, but you get seduced into it. And I mention that as an example because I know somebody that told me about her father that worked at that place and that ended up having to suffer through the things that you just referred to as the young Dutch woman or girl, Miss America, had to suffer through, and Kathy O'Brien did, and I join you in promoting Kathy O'Brien's work. She's done terrific stuff, and I believe her stories. I think we should all start just stop with the hesitation. There's too much of it. There's just too much. It's everywhere. I don't need to say anymore. Aquino and all of that creepy stuff and the satanic, right down to Podesta and that creepy. Well, we're not going to go there, but to me, getting back to the theme of it, the political control is the goal. Controlling individual people's minds is a way to achieve the political goal of controlling a country or a nation or a group of people. And historically, I think it can be shown that picking a child at a young age and putting them through some trauma type of training opens them up to become controlled later in life. And I think that this has happened. For instance, look at the Grimm's fairy tales, the Hansel and Gretel, where the witch, what does she do? She bakes children and eats them. Well, is that, first of all, I'm not sure it's a great children's story, but all of these Grimm's tales talk about, the Central Europe in the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, where children may very well be put into an abusive situation so that they can be used by the real power, if it's in a kingdom in Swabia, or if it's in the CIA in our times. These techniques have not gone away, and they've just gotten enhanced. And they've had psychologists like that crazy Ewan Cameron up in McGill, and Scott and Gottlieb, and all of the rest of them that the CIA paid to try to figure out how to control people's minds. Well, that gets awful close to home for me, because I think that's what they did to my dad. But getting back to the female side of it, these what George Webb has talked about, for years is the Oconus lures, the females that are trained to sexually seduce and then get the people on the video, and then you own them. It's a vicious, vile, disgusting technique. And the worst thing is that I think that the Ghislaine Maxwell trial is going to go nowhere. I think that James Comey's daughter on the prosecution team is a overt conflict of interest. I think that this is getting covered up and pushed aside so that we don't get to ask those questions. And the evidence is going to be slap and sealed, as George has taught us that the judges will do, not to punish anybody, but to keep the public from knowing what the real facts are. They're trying very hard not to let these facts come out. But with the background that you have, what do you think? Do you think we're going to have any transparency about the Maxwell family coming out of this trial?
No, not in the trial. It's not going to come from government sources. They're thoroughly compromised, and me and along with millions of other people have given up on it. And that doesn't bother me really, that this trial, because we're doing you and me both, all of us here are watching. We're doing our own work. We can put it together. That's all that's necessary. And then we as a people, organically, as it should be done anyway, amongst fellow human beings who are moral and righteous and God-fearing and not worshiping Luciferian principles, we can achieve justice without the court system. That itself is a revolutionary realization that I've come to over the past couple of years. We keep appealing to the courts or to the, please help me, Mr. Senator, Senator Rand Paul, whoever else. Please help us, President Trump. We don't need no stinking badges. All right. We have deputized ourselves as the court of truth, or as I like to say, truth, because it comes from the grassroots. Now, in the case, I'll give you a concrete example. In the case of a book like this, which I got like dirt cheap, I think the postage was more expensive than the book. It's used, it's falling apart. I had to buy a hardback copy for my permanent collection. But in reading this book, I find out that a lot of this technology, John, that you allude to, the mind control technology, was perfected by, well, we know, let's say Dr. Mengele, just as sort of a name brand, but there's a whole branch of science behind that, right? Comes out of Germany. Now, it so happens that Robert Maxwell, who hadn't spent a day in college, his wife, however, is highly educated. She had 2 years at the Sorbonne, during World War II. And I have a suspicion, not in a book, but I think she was studying some of the great Parisian occultic traditions. She mentions attending the lectures of Henri Bergson, right, who was a mystic in his own right. But she was getting all this, what later turned out to be surrealism and Dadaism, and which also gets into the Dr. George, whatever his name is in LA, the Black Dahlia guy, right? But the person who was exfiltrating all this research from mind control as well as physics, right? We all know about Operation Paperclip by now, the exfiltration of thousands of German physicists, scientists, technicians to the U.S., some to the Soviet Union, some to Britain, but a huge number here in the U.S. But this is in the age before the internet. You couldn't just access a journal, an electronic journal, and get all the state-of-the-art physics research on anti-gravity, on zero-point energy, on triangular aircraft, right? That Michael Salla has been writing about. Space Force, new book on by Salla that talks about that knowledge base. Who was delivering it to the expatriate German and Austrian and Hungarian, different nationalities, to the United States? It was Robert Maxwell, the traveling salesman. He worked from 48, 49, something. He was a young man on the make, who made his bones in the military. He is a certified war hero. There's a picture of him getting the military. He was in the British Army. He got the Military Cross from Field Commander Bernard Montgomery, right? One of the great figures in military history. But other than that, he had no contacts. But he was recruited into British military intelligence. Some say also Israeli, and then some people say, oh, it's Bolshevik. It was Soviet. I get comments saying, oh, you're looking down the wrong road. It's bullshit. People have a fixed idea and they don't want to move off of it. But whatever the case, the point is that it was Robert Maxwell who was the point man for none other than Springer Verlag. A Verlag is a publisher. Springer, it's a family. It's a family of publishers, probably going back to the early days of movable type. I don't know. And in publishing and education was one of the reasons why German science was so state of the art, way ahead of everybody else. But Springer Verlag was one of the publishers that did all the journals in all the areas of cutting edge science, from behavioral science, biological, physics, chemistry. Oh my gosh, they were right there. And Robert Maxwell, this sounds like a familiar story, right? He went to all the academic conferences, and this is before the days of thumb drives. He'd have to go there and take notes himself. He'd recruit all the best minds from the Soviet Union, and this is when travel to the Soviet Union was not really, he must have had some kind of special dispensation, because he was traveling there from, like, say, 1957 onwards, continually. But he's going all over the place. He by the time he ended his career, he had gone through 20 passports that had been stamped. But guess where else he was going? Now, this was interesting to me, because it brings us to 2021. He was making plenty of trips to Tokyo, right? These are the progenitors of Kawaoka, who was at Wisconsin. He was bringing all that bacteriological Zeitschriften from the journals, right? Springer Verlag. And he was taking also to Beijing and Nanjing, to the universities in China, as early as the 1950s. So they were getting it all, and it didn't really matter where he took it, because I think amongst the brain trust in Beijing, in Tokyo, City of London, in Moscow, in Berlin, or Frankfurt, they were all in on it. They said, let's create some wars amongst. That's part of their business model. And we're going to, in order to create this system of permanent terror, we're going to share all this science information. And Robert Maxwell is going to be delivering this to your doorstep. So your scientists can pretend to be in a space race or a nuclear arms sort of intimidation strategy. for decades to come, or a secret space program. But we're all on the same team. We're all on the same team. And we know that now because as it turns out, there are a set of twin institutions that have shown themselves to be at the top of the pyramid. And that's what I call the NATO/United Nations Caliphate. That's them. That's them. That was the plan. And Robert Maxwell was right. He was a hustler right in the middle of it. He wasn't dealing opium necessarily. He wasn't trafficking in children, but he was trafficking in knowledge, in information. And that's boring, you see. That's not very sexy. That we can't talk about Lolita Express. We're talking about, gosh, German science written in Germanic prose. It reads like a Hegelian dissertation and all these equations. Boring. But the deal is that Robert Maxwell, as a facilitator, is the one person who's probably most responsible for the current state of chaos that we're living in. This terror state, this bioterror state. It all comes down to this facilitator, this courier named Robert Maxwell. And by the way, he's had several identities. He was born originally Abraham Leiber Hook, right, in Czechoslovakia, what is now Czechoslovakia. By the way, he was also a Carpathian from the Carpathian Mountains. You mentioned Eastern Europe, Central Europe. He was from Dracula land. Right?
Mhm.
He was from that area where the Grimm brothers were collecting these folk tales, which were not tales. They were just more like documentaries with narrative.
Well, yeah. The Duke really does maintain this lady that she calls herself a witch, and she produces the Oconus lures for the emperor.
Yes.
That's the way it works.
This is in pre-modern times. It's generationally perpetuated. So Ghislaine Maxwell is in a long line of these female, what George Webb calls Oconus lures.
Yeah.
But it's not just continental USA, it's global lures.
And
maybe off planet too. They might be having relationship with the Nordic extraterrestrials for all we know.
Well, that's what Donald what's his name? The Dawkins, the school up in New York, what's his name? Barr. Oh yeah. William Barr's father.
Donald Barr.
Yeah, whose great opus is called Space Relations. And it's all about people having sex in zero gravity situations, and basically selling sexual servants back and forth. I hadn't read it, but this has been described to me a number of times. David Underdown and I have had some fascinating talks about the economy generally, and one of the things that I think we can all identify with is that there came a time in David's studies when he realized that everything that he was taught, in college, all the principles of how to run a corporation, how to say invest. What do you choose? How do you choose a stock to invest in, for instance? A very simple question if you're going to go into that field, if that's how you're going to make your living. Well, all the rules that had been taught, through decades are no longer applicable because the society moved from a society of production to what we now call the information society, the information age. And because information is now more valuable than owning the means of production. So why would you own a factory when you can own the patent that controls all the factories in China? And you just sit back and get the royalties in. So the information part of it is more valuable now than the production part of it. How did that happen? Well, that's happened. It's done. So the old, price earnings ratio stuff, forget about it. It's more about what do you think is going to be the next technology, the one that everybody's going to race to invest in. What do you think is going to be that next one? Is it going to, suddenly solve all of the health problems of the world, or suddenly solve all of the food problems of the world, or suddenly, make everybody, able to just snap their fingers and have a meal. Anything that you can imagine that would be feasible that you can come up with, and then the government gets into it by financing all of these extraordinary ideas that DARPA comes up with. And so we have DARPA. We now also have BARDA to do the biological wiki wacky. And so all of this intellectual property is now the reason that you would invest. You would invest in a Google instead of a Ford plant, because Google is where the information is. And so let's go with the modern economy. I think it's a big trap. I think it's going to be a disaster when it blows up. But you mentioned Maxwell as being a purveyor of information. And that is what I mean to bring this all together, is that you're right. It's not only is it information, it is secret, highly valuable information, and valuable enough to take your own child and turn her into an Akonis lure.
Absolutely. Now I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that everybody in the live chat here, I'm going to give you a hot stock tip, right? John has talked about the information economy and how it's going to implode, and it already seems to be doing so. But I read this book over the past couple of days. It's by Dr. Michael Salla, and we've talked about him before in passing, John, right? You've asked me if I read his books.
I got one of his books. I can't remember which one.
I have this one, the U.S. Navy's Space Force, and I give these talks on my own channel because I don't like to get too much into the woo-woo with you, John.
Oh, I got it.
Okay.
Antarctica's Hidden History.
Yeah, I got to get that one.
Yeah.
I'm going to get the complete set, but the recent one here is called Space Force. It's called Our Star Trek Future. Forget about the Star Trek reference. He documents what is going to replace the this is the true Great Reset. It's not just biotechnology and all that, but it's really the space economy. And macro economists have said it's going to be worth trillions of dollars. This is the new economy. It's the physical economy too, but the theater is going to be outside the ionosphere. That is mining nearby planets of rare or unknown materials, metals, and whatnot. Colonization. Space tourism is just sort of the pop lure that we're being tossed here.
Oh, yeah.
But this is going to be worth trillions of dollars. The only problem is it's the same network of people, right? The same families that are going to be monopolizing. They already are in the catbird seat. And the one name that keeps cropping up again and again is the Central Intelligence Agency. They have zero accountability in this new dawn of the space economy, space-based economy. They have zero political funding that they need to rely on, because up to this point they've been relying on the drug trade and human trafficking in order to have a self-financing or self-licking ice cream cone going. But they won't need any sort of civilian funding. They will be able, because they have become the new government. What we're seeing with Dr. Rand Paul and as a senator, or whoever, Ted Cruz, these people, whoever's the presiding judge over the Maxwell trial, these are largely ceremonial posts. These are ceremonial positions, and gets people all worked up about, well, she should have been guilty or she's not. It's the same show, right? So our biggest task for the moment, and I think we can overcome this perceptual hurdle, is to abandon any sort of hope in those quarters and just keep doing our work here. Because as I learned from rereading Ian Fleming, I'm rereading the entire 12 books of Ian Fleming as a understanding of how the other side thinks, MI6 in his case. Says assassinations won't work. If you assassinate someone from the Soviet bloc, that was his bête noire, right? Soviet agents, they're going to make him into a hero of the state. Right. So what his approach was, Ian Fleming through James Bond, was to beat them at the gaming tables. at chemin de fer or roulette, go to the casinos and embarrass them. And I'm finding out in reading the books, there's always a prominent gambling casino, luxury casinos, of course, subtext, where that's how he 007 beats the bad guys, whether it's Emil Goldfinger or this guy Sherrill, I can't remember his name. He's German, of course, his real name, but he's the bad guy in Moonraker. I can't remember. I'm getting the books mixed up. But he takes them to the gaming tables and humiliates them, outwitting them, outsmarting, out-cheating them so I think that strategy of embarrassment and losing face and humiliation is something that we can do, right? It's nonviolent. All we have to do is read the gossip rags, National Enquirer, which is a CIA operation in order to put out damaging information about people that they want to take down. That's pretty much what they do. We're attracted to assassinations and boom, boom, right? But the real success story of CIA and even the FBI is not boom, boom assassination. It's character assassination.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and character destruction.
Absolutely.
Just taking somebody and destroying their life,
Yes.
gaslighting their family, gaslighting their wife. That's what they do.
Right.
I see David Underdown is here, says Ian Fleming's dad and Mark Rich were both burlap sack tycoons.
What does that mean, burlap sack? They were like parvenus or nouveau
Let's
riche?
ask David. You got to tell us, because I don't know what it is, what it refers to either. But
Let's hear from Detroit Dave.
yeah, Ian Fleming. He's supposedly one of the high guys in MI6. I can't remember which one, but
Special branch.
we're waiting for.
He was a newspaper man, by the way. He was a newspaper man, and 2 months out of the year he could spend down in Jamaica hanging out with the ultra rich who really know where the action is. It's not in any of their home countries. It's like, the Panama Papers recently exposed this whole hidden banking system that's based in the Caribbean. And Ian Fleming he had a catbird seat on it to check it out. That's why gambling, it's the casino economy, the Monte Carlos, this is, Princess Grace Kelly and Monaco, all those venues there, where all the glitterati come for the film festivals, the international celebrity culture. George Clooney and Emil, his husband, Emil, whatever, the human rights lawyer.
Amal, I think.
Oh, okay. Amal Clooney. Yeah. Dave Underdown says founded on burlap.
Ian Fleming's dad had a bank in London founded on burlap. They must have been in the burlap business, I mean, armies bought a lot of burlap, I'm sure they needed it for
it
their.
Certainly helps if the burlap sacks were filled with opium.
Well, that's the thing is when you now every time I see a casino, I think money laundering, and we have National Harbor here in Maryland, which George and I visited, dozens and dozens of times, and it's always a pleasure to go somewhere like that with George, because he knows all this stuff. And I didn't not understand it, but once you look at it and you realize, oh, that's why all the Chinese tourists are going to National Harbor, because they got their purses are just bulging with cash, and they're going to go and gamble it. And suppose you've got some hot money. Suppose you walk in with $100,000 of hot currency, but you put it into the gambling casino a little bit at a time. It disappears. You get some real money back. Maybe you only got 90,000 back because you're not a very good gambler, but that's 90,000 real money that you now you can really spend. It's all money laundering, and absolutely. So yeah, that's why the casinos, and that's where the drug money goes.
I had a girlfriend, Taiwanese American, whose father was a chef 6 days, 5 days a week. But on the weekends, he'd drive over to Las Vegas, just takes a few hours to get there from the LA area. And I'm sure he was connected somehow. He'd take a bunch of money there and lose it, quote unquote, lose it. Now, on the other end of it, Robert Maxwell, he'd go down Monte Carlo frequently. $80 come back. He was so lucky the way she portrays it. He was just an incredibly gifted gambler. But these were payoffs. He was taking the cash back coming from the casino. And if people ask him, well, I wanted it at the tables, right? But these are millions of French francs or whatever denominations he was doing. So they're in a bit of a quandary on how to launder monies now that people know what it's about. My suspicion is that the real glitzy centers of gambling, Monte Carlo or whatever it might be, are moving to the Indian casinos, and that's where Jack Abramoff had an important role to play.
Yeah.
Is setting. Remember him, Casino Jack?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, he was setting up the network there.
Mhm.
And sort of over the past few years or so, after reading about Jack Abramoff and his dealings, his shady dealings with the Pequot Nation, supposedly, and these were all posers. They weren't really Pequots at all. Reading about that as sort of an avocation, John, whenever I'm driving on the freeway, I always I have a lunch or I stop at a casino, ostensibly an Indian casino, and check it out and say, and because we're living the history. It would be like going to the Flamingo Hotel in the 1950s when Las Vegas was the destination place, right? They're glorified as the Rat Pack or whatever the George Clooney movie, that little gang that they formed, right? But the action now is the Indian casino, quote unquote Indian Native American casinos. I think that's where the money's flowing through.
Let me get back to a question I've been wanting to ask you about Robert Maxwell, okay? Because I think I can admire him as a military guy, as a very, very smart guy, as somebody that can outsmart the crooks in a situation, kind of like a James Bond, and it sounds fun and sexy and cool. But you're familiar with the fraud charges against him.
Yes.
For allegedly, and I guess that he's been pretty much has he hadn't. I don't know whether he contested it or not, but the story is that he stole like $400 million worth of money from the pension fund for his publishing empire, and left all of his employees high and dry. And so my question is, why would he do that? What was he broke? I mean, with all of his contacts and all of his savvy and skill, why couldn't he just go out to the gambling casino and walk out with another 400 million and say, so what? Give a million, take $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Why did he have to rip off his own people?
Well, I got this information by I think probably the first biographer of Robert Maxwell. That was Gordon Thomas. He invited me to his home for lunch, and we had a great conversation about his 2 or 3 different volumes. One is called Israeli Super Spy. He written 2 or 3 books on Maxwell specifically. He also wrote about Wenho Lee, by the way. He's done he has had a pretty impressive career. And he said the reason why, according to his books, and again, you have to take it with a grain of salt because Gordon Thomas himself had some contacts with British intelligence, and some of it was, this information was given to him to kind of spread out there, I think, right? It could be kind of limited truth. But the fact is that Maxwell was over-leveraged purposely in order to burn him. This is what the handlers do to keep you in control. Because you talked about sex compromise, right? There's also financial compromise. You get people into incredible debt. People like Michael Jackson is a good example. But Maxwell is certainly susceptible to that. And then push him into these incredibly antisocial. I mean, you're raiding your own employees' pension funds. That's nasty. That's what people are going to focus on, right? At the same time, though, they want to burn him. He's just a puppet. He's the servant of empire. He's the ultimate servant of empire. And for me, if I was one of these people, one of these aspirational moguls, and they're not as bright as we may think they are, right? They have a lot of charisma, and they know how to navigate different social milieu and all that, but they're not very bright, but they are ambitious. And those are the people that are getting us into trouble now. So I advise them to read up about Robert Maxwell and study him as an object lesson in something you do not want to get involved with. Just play it straight, play it clean, make it the hard way. There's no shortcut to wealth. You can make it, especially in a place like America, but you have to do it right. And you have to do it in a way that's not going to hurt the women and children, and try to pledge yourself and get yourself in a situation like Dr. Malone, where we're looking at the die-off of untold countless numbers of people because of your particular obsession with success. But what happened to Robert Maxwell? His body was found floating somewhere off the Canary Islands. He had, as most people know, had fallen, quote unquote, fallen off the stern of the yacht named after his last child, his final child, Ghislaine Maxwell, called the Lady Ghislaine. How's that for poetic justice? 1991. So I don't know if that answers your question, but the looting, it did happen. The looting of the pension fund was largely to, again, stimulate moral outrage so that his deeper devious activities would go unobserved. And because he knew that him through the Springer family, including the current scion of the Springer family line, I think his name is Axel Springer, but the granddaddy was Ferdinand. That's the one that Robert Maxwell knew. But he knew people like Max Born, Einstein, Niels Bohr. He knew all the names, and he had them all signed up as editors. And there's probably money changing hands, right? There's more and more scholarship, by the way, showing that Albert Einstein himself was not the genius that Henry Booth Luce made him out to be. A lot of his stuff was stolen from an Indian scientist, right? Physicist. Indian physics is incredibly sophisticated. But Einstein, people like this were set up as celebrity scientists in order to ring in this new system of total control, total scientific, full spectrum dominance, some people call it. People need a celebrity face in order to get the program across. Sir Robert Maxwell served that purpose to a certain point. He outlived his usefulness. He wound up floating. He was a floater. 1991. Let that be a lesson to all the ambitious white shoe boys coming. And you might, be a different background. The ones coming out of the elite colleges, those days are over. The world public knows your backstory. So you have no choice but to play it straight, play it clean from here on out, and to start telling us the truth and having your masters fess up, right? Whether it's Dr. Malone, who seems to be turning toward light instead of proceeding into the path of darkness, and other individuals. There's tons of them. Like, I'm just using Dr. Malone as someone that you and George Webb and others have been focusing on, and might have some problems about him. But he's an example of how none of this is irreversible. We've talked about Miss America. We've talked about Kathy O'Brien. All of them, despite incredible physical, mental, psychological, sex trauma, were able to find love at the end. They found their life mate, their life partners, their soul partners. They got married, and now they're living life fully, having gone through that process. I say all the people who are complicit with these incredibly unspeakable crimes that most of us, even a cynic like me, have their difficult time wrapping our minds around. It's time for these people to look at the example of those who had fallen prey to the Prince of Darkness and to return to light. This is what we can do as we move into the holy season and into the new year 2022. This is my invitation. I'm imploring the people who are tottering here to join the forces of light. and goodness.
Professor, it's already 8:59. We've just rolled through an hour so fast. I can't believe it. I'm sitting here looking through all the comments, and I must say we have got some wonderful comments here and brilliant thinkers. Um, it, one person brought up the Promise software, and I'm not familiar with the connection between Robert Maxwell and the Promise software. Maybe I knew it and forgot it, but that's something we should talk about sometime. Um, a number of other just great references, and I'll be looking at them all after the show. Um, Thanks so much. It's so great to have you back, and it has been too long. So let's get together again in not too long, Professor.
All right. I look forward to having a conversation with you about Rulers of Evil by Tupper Saucy. You've been reading that, so
Oh, let
which
me
is
let me
great.
let me
Yeah.
give you a tease then for another man with Huguenot roots who's going to
Yes.
be joining us next week. His name is Sean Ross,
Ah,
the famous jure from your YouTube. He's a man who's um, making his life a journey to teach us about the continuing deep control emanating out of the present version of the Templars, and he goes all the way back into Egypt. And he's a professor, highly qualified to talk about it. He understands the demotic language, and he ties it all together in an amazing way. So Tuesday at 11 a.m., because he's in Europe, we do the show in the morning. So another Huguenot to toss into the mix, and it'll be a lot of fun.
thank you, John.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And thanks very much to everyone who contributed to my Patreon last month. That was very, very kind of you. Thanks for the support for the channel. All right. Good night, everybody.